Well, thank you.
Okay, so you know the deal by now, right? So you've got 30 seconds. Like, why did you decide to run for Congress 7 years ago? And by the way, I should say, we ran against each other and we're still friends. It's like, it's not a big deal.
Speak for yourself.
Okay, hey, I got the better job.
So I just wanted to start off with, that wasn't the joke I planned to start with, but okay. We are friends. The joke I was going to start with is going back to the AI question you asked earlier. Is if you would just superimpose my face and picture over all of Tracy's answers, I'd be happy. In terms of, and we'll see at the end of my 10 minutes whether I did a good enough job matching that. But I filed to run again for Congress for a couple of reasons. One. I think the debt is a huge issue that we've got to address, and I know it's been talked about before. And just looking at where we are with the debt and the impact there, and it's a tough issue at some point in time because there's going to be some tough decisions that we have to make. It's not just you can't grow your way out of it, and so we've got to focus on how do we accomplish that. That's one of the reasons why I got on the budget committee this year, was specifically to focus on the debt and the deficit. The other piece is looking at how do we address and continue to grow the economy. And some of the focus that we have on the Ways and Means Committee is looking at how do we keep good trade practices and policies going forward. How do we have good tax policies, which next year is going to be a huge issue on taxes. And so I want to be involved in that process of how do we make sure we address those issues and move things forward.
Well, so let's go back to the debt and deficit. Like, this is not something that gets solved next budget year. So what is a path forward to beginning to reduce that, the debt and the deficit? So the debt is the long-term debt and the deficit is the annual budget debt.
Right. Deficit. So, it's talked about before, and Dr. Reddy mentioned that, $35 trillion. That's what we owe now. The $260, everybody in this room owes $260,000, and all of your friends and relatives outside the room owe an additional $260,000 in the current debt. And at the spending level that we're at right now, 1 out of every $4 that the federal government spends is borrowed. 1 out of every $4. And that equates to about $80,000 a second is being borrowed. So we're borrowing more than the median income of a Kansas household every second through that process. So obviously there's some tough things we have to address. The discretionary spending, which we're going to talk about a lot over the next few months as we go to appropriate for 2025, the discretionary spending is less than 25%. So even if we appropriated $0 for defense, for labor department, for health and human services, for executive branch, for the legislative branch, accumulated $0 for them, we'd still be borrowing money to fund the automatic program. So not only do we have to talk about the discretionary spending, but we've also got to make some hard discussions around Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamp program, WIC, TANF, some of those programs that prior Congresses put in place to happen on an automatic basis. And we've got to have some hard choices. And I know there were a couple of us that were talking earlier. Kyle Hoffman was here talking about his CRP ground that his family has. And he was talking about the current rate of payment that they get on the CRP ground is $47 an acre. He said if he went out and did a cash lease of that land, it'd be about $18 an acre. So there's some things, some decisions that we have to make on things, and how do we address those? I could go through a lot of different scenarios on different issues, but we've got to dive into those, and it's not just discretionary, but it's also looking at some of those other programs as well.
Immigration, I think I can't, I know you're just the third candidate, and I feel like I've asked this, but what's your solution on illegal immigration and legal immigration?
Yeah, so
in 30 seconds.
So we need to make legal immigration easier and illegal immigration harder. That's the core process of what we need to look at. There's enough things wrong with the legal immigration process that's out there. I mean, whether you're trying to become a citizen and going through that process, there's stumbles along the way. If you come to one of our great universities and get a degree, you can't always get a work permit to come to work in the United States. So we send all this brain power back to their home country where they don't want to go, but then they start up companies and compete against us. And so legal immigration, we have to have a focus on how do we improve that. But also the border security has become an issue now. And it's related to immigration, but it's different. And I kind of make concentric rings around that in terms of talking about that because there is a relationship there. But, we can't have unlimited open access. I mean, no country in the world does that just because you have to have some laws around what the process is. And we want to make sure that we tie in as we have folks coming in with visas to work or other presences that they're actually working and bringing in skill sets that help the United States, not just, well, I want to make more money or in the case of so much of what we see today with the cartels on the Mexican side, bringing in gang members in the United States, there's people from over 160 countries that have crossed the border into the United States illegally. They avoided a checkpoint and came across the border because they wanted to get into the country. And so it's not just a South American, Central America issue through that process. It's a money-making issue that's out there. We've got to make sure that we can address the border issue so that we can get back to immigration. And we had a pretty good bill in 2018. It needed a couple of tweaks around H-2B and H-2A visas and the process there. But we ran out of time with it being an election year. And so we need to get back and have a secure border so we can work on immigration.
I'm looking at Eric. What's our time? Okay, so plenty of time for like 10 more questions.
All right, let's make sure we get to the last one.
So yes, we'll get to the last one. Your thoughts on trade and tariffs? Like we've talked about, Kansas is a big exporting state, but we also import a lot of things. And I think both candidates for president have talked about tariffs, and just your thoughts about trade and the role Congress should or could have with that.
Yeah. So Congress has authority and responsibility for trade. It's embedded in the responsibility of the Ways and Means Committee. We've got to make sure that we address that and use that responsibility appropriately. I think, as kind of been said before, is that there have been more people lifted out of poverty over the last 70 years through free markets and free and fair trade. And we need to make sure we continue that process going forward. Now, we do have instances in some countries and some products of dumping, and so we got to address those. And tariffs are probably the best way to do that with some of those products. And then there's also the issue of the Chinese Communist Party and the issues where they're intentionally going out and blowing up industries by undercutting them through the process of what they do in order to take over. They've done it with steel, they've done it with solar panels, they've done it with a host of other things. So we need to make sure that in those cases tariffs make sense, but otherwise tariffs are tax. I mean, that's why it's a Ways and Means Committee, is because the tariff was designed as a tax, as a revenue generator.
Last question, why should the Kansas business community and CD4 vote for you?
So I spent most of my career in the private sector looking at how do we solve problems. I did working both with computer systems and working with Six Sigma processes, a lot with manufacturing distribution companies. And so I see the value of how in the private sector that you can make things better, that you can actually deliver results, that you have the freedom to make those decisions, and people have the choices of what they want to do. And we should make sure that we continue to focus on that. We should, the policies that we put in place at the federal level should help make sure that we incentivize economic growth, incentivize that innovation that America's so fond of. I mean, we've invented everything from air conditioners to zippers, and we need to keep that innovation going forward so that we can continue to be a leader in the world.
Thank you, Congressman Ron Estes. Appreciate you being here. Take care. Good job.